Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Huron. The world of cowboy stories, we ride the stories of the West. Campfire truths, trail dust, memories, saloon whispers. Gritty humans, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. Heat climbed out of the dirt like a living thing and clung to her. Cuervo Flats shimmered behind a screen of dust and afternoon glare. Ray Delgado eased her mare to a halt at the hitch rail outside the Red Spoke and slid off the saddle. Bellwether's flanks were white with salt. The horse's breath came in short, wet bursts. A strip of rattlesnake tail nailed to the porch post clicked in the wind, a dry little rattle that sounded like a warning. Ray tied a loose knot, pressed her cheek to Bellwether's jaw a second, then straightened. She could feel grit in her teeth and the rope burn along her neck, where an old scar never stopped itching, not in heat like this. She pulled her hat low and pushed through the bat wings. The Red Spoke smelled like kerosene sour beer and men gone too long without rain. A pair of girls leaned on the bar in faded satin. A piano with two missing keys threw a crooked tune into the haze. Overhead, a green glass lamp wept a thin line of oil down its stem. Someone had filled it pour. Boone Riker was already at the back table. A heavy man, sunburnt and shiny in all the wrong places, with a scar on his chin and a silver steerhead on his belt. 3 others ringed him. They turned when she crossed. They always turned. Curiosity first, then the shift. She kept her eyes where they belonged and spoke like she had every right to take up space. Seat open. Boone's grin showed a gold tooth. Always room for a lady who likes to lose. $1 says I don't. She bought in small and touched her chips like they might bite. She took a whiskey and let it sit on her tongue until it burned clean. The cards were dirty around the edges, green with sweat. She watched hands and wrists and throats. She listened for the catch in breath that came before a bet. Boone talked with his whole face. He showed heat when he hit and tried to smother it when he missed. The man to his right blinked too much. The thin one smelled like old onions and was scared of silence. Ray said little. Her voice when she used it was flat and dry. Boone leaned close after a win and pushed his luck. "Where'd you learn to shuffle like that girl?" He dragged the word. "Same place you learned to lose," she said. Laughter flickered at the other tables, then died. The bartender looked over. The piano hit a wrong note, and the player swore softly and kept going. Hands stacked into an hour that felt longer. Ray's pile grew and sank and grew again. Her body remembered hunger and dust, and the weight of a gun on the hip. Her mind kept time with the drip from the kerosene lamp, a steady tick that made her jaw ache. The big hand came at last. The room pulled in around it. Boone's eyes were little coins of blue in a red face. He shoved everything forward, a sloppy sweep that made the chips clatter. Put up or get out. Ray looked at her. Cards. Looked away, looked back. She let him see her throat move when she swallowed. He laughed a wet sound. He slapped his hand down. Full house. Aces over tens. Read it and weep, sweetheart. Ray laid them quiet. 4 queens. No smile, no flourish, no need. Silence came down like a lid. Boone's grin curdled. The gold tooth disappeared. "You cheating little half-breed," he said. The word fell hard. A few men looked away. More did not. Ray did not move. I played what I drew. He stood. The chair rocked back and clapped the floor. The bartender raised his hands. "You two take it outside, not in here." "Glad to," Boone said. His voice had gone cold. It had the sound of a man who had killed before, and would again, and did not consider it work. Ray picked up her money. She did not put it in her pocket. She kept it in her hand. She turned for the back door, where the air was a little cooler, and the world narrowed to an alley no wider than a wagon with an adobe wall that held the heat like a stove. The lamp above the stair leaked its sweet stink, a kerosene tear running fat and slow. She was halfway to the corner when his hand closed on her arm. He turned her and drove her hard into the wall. The shock took her breath and put grit between her teeth again. His face filled her sky. Whiskey meet anger. He smiled without his mouth. "Say, please," he said. She put her knee up, as if to beg, and then put it where it hurt most. His breath tore out of him. His grip loosened. The small pistol was in her hand before his fingers found his belt. She did not aim long. The barrel kissed his shirt. The trigger broke. The shot snapped to the alley and came back at her twice. Boone stared at her eyes wider than any hand he had ever held. He looked down as if his own blood was a trick. He slid down into the side and did not get up. The door banged. A lantern swung. The bartender and two of Boone's men crowded the space. Lantern light drew hard lines on Ray's face on the wall, on the dark that spread like a shadow with weight. "She murdered him," the bartender said. His voice shook, but he made it big. "He tried to force me," Ray said. Her voice was low and steady because it had to be. "You lured him out here," the thin man said. "We saw you cheat." The alley filled with more bodies, more hot breath. Words fell in clumps. Half-breed, greaser, thief. The heat inside Ray's chest changed. It was old and it was tired, and it had kept her alive. She put the pistol down. She didn't mean to. Someone had already taken it. Hands found her. The rope came from somewhere. There is always rope in a town like this. They dragged her knees and boots, bumping the ground. The street spread out under the white sky. A cottonwood at the far end kept its own counsel and threw a thin shade that made a lie of mercy. "Up with her," someone said. A boy's voice broke on the last word. Ray's wrists burned where they tied. The hemp cut and made her fingers numb. The rope around her neck was rough as a rasp. She smelled it. Old rain, an animal, and dust. She thought of her mother's dress with the red roses and could not stop that picture from landing. The first pull lifted her heels. The second took her breath. She twisted. The knot at her wrists turned against bone. She found the hilt with her thumb knuckle, the little knife she carried honest and close down in the boot. It took 3 tries to hook it. She sawed blind. The crowd blurred and sharpened and blurred again while her vision pulsed in black moths. The rope at her wrists gave. She grabbed the noose at her throat with both hands and clawed space enough for air. She got the knife in under the hemp and pulled. It bit slow. It bit true. The rope snapped and she fell sideways and down hard. Pain crawled up her shoulder and lit her ribs. "She's loose," the bartender shouted. The first bullet hissed by her ear. The second tore a line of fire along her side. It felt hot and then cold. Ray ran. Her legs moved without orders. She went low and crooked through legs and around barrels past a woman's dress and a dog that shrank away as if it knew already how this would go. The street was a blur of faces, some angry, some hungry, some only curious. She did not look for help. She kept the livery in front of her and air in her lungs. The livery was cool as a church and smelled of hay and old leather and mouse droppings. The man inside spat and watched and did not stop her. Bellwether turned her head in the stall and blew soft through her nose a question. Ray cut the tie rope with the same knife and looped the reins with a hand that shook and a hand that did not. No time for a saddle. No time for thanks. The mare bunched under her like a spring when Ray threw herself up bareback. The first step was a stumble. The second was flight. They burst into white light. The alley on the left filled with men who tried to remember how to shoot and shout at the same time. A bullet struck the doorframe and spit splinters. Another jumped dust beside the mare's front feet. "Stop her!" someone yelled. Ray lowered herself along Bellwether's neck. She could feel each muscle slide. She could hear the whistle of the mare's breath and the roar of her own blood and the small, clean click of that nailed rattler on the Red Spoke's porch as the wind took it. They cut past the water trough. A fat man in a vest with a gold watch chain, Mayor Whitaker Hale, stood in the shade and watched, with a face like a man waiting for the punchline to land. Sheriff Rand Murdoch hesitated by the post office door with a cigar that had gone cold and did not move until someone said his name. Ray saw it and did not save it for later. She was busy not dying. The road south lay open where the street thinned into 2 ruts cut into plain. The mesquite stood thin and mean. The sky was a hard white plate. Bellwether found a gallop that lived somewhere below Payne. Ray's side burned like a brand. The rope had made a necklace of heat. She tasted iron and dust. Behind her, Cuervo Flat spilled noise and then swallowed it. The town shrank to a grid of boards and tar, and one green lamp that always burned wrong. The smell of kerosene ran with the wind a long time and then fell away. A pair of black birds made lazy circles far out where the ground turned to shimmer. Ray set her jaw and leaned into the run. She did not look back. Bellwether's ears flicked, caught a sound Ray did not yet hear. Rattle or insect, or only the way dry grass talks when heat breaks it. The sun pulled the shadow of horse and rider out long and thin across the country, like a line that might never end. Ray shifted her weight and let Bellwether choose the line along the low ground, where the scrub grew a little thicker and the wind lay down. Blood stuck her shirt to her skin. She put the knife away and put her hand flat on the mare's neck, to keep them both here in this breath, in this heartbeat, in this dust. The world got big. The little noises in town became a story someone else would tell. The only things that mattered were the 4 beats under her and the white line of horizon, and the way the light went from gold to brass. Heat lived in the bones of the day. It would let go after sundown. Not yet. A jackrabbit broke from cover. Bellwether flicked an ear and kept on. Ray blinked sweat out of her eyes and spit grit. Her mouth tasted like pennies. She thought of water and gave up thinking. She counted fence posts until there were no fence posts to count. She listened for the dry rattle again and heard only hoofbeats and breath. They crossed a wash where the last rain had carved the earth like ribs. Bellwether slid, found herself climbed out. Ray's fingers cramped around the reins. She made them open. She did not talk to the horse. Words were weight. She could not afford any. She let the land have its say. White sky, red dust. Ocotillo sticks like a prayer the wind had forgotten. She did not pray. She kept riding. By the time the sun had sagged low enough to throw a kind light, the town had dropped off the edge of the world. Ray let Bellwether ease. The mare shook her head and snorted foam dry on her lips. Ray slid down and walked beside her a little while to give the back a rest. The ground came up through her boots. It felt steady enough. It felt like a promise, if a promise could be made of rock and heat and breath. They walked until Ray's leg said stop. She put her hand on the mare's shoulder and leaned there and watched a hawk draw a clean line against the light. The little rattlesnake tail nailed to the porch at the red spoke clicked in her head like a clock. She put her foot in the rain and climbed up again. Night would come fast. The desert held no favors. She set her eyes on a darker line where low hills gathered themselves and asked nothing else of the world. Bellwether moved. Ray let her. Dust rose and hung in the still air, a slow ghost that would not be chased away until the light changed and the heat let go. They went on. By the time the light thinned to a copper edge, Ray could not tell where her breath ended and the mare's began. Bellwether took a bad step in a dry wash and righted herself with a grunt. Ray slid to the ground and let the reins hang. Sand rasped against her teeth. The world tilted and steadied and tilted again. A single click came through the still air. Not a gun. A small bell on leather. A tall rider eased out of the brush on a rangy bay. He wore a sweat-dark hat and a trail coat the color of dirt. His braid was bound with a strip of horsehair. The bay's ears pricked forward, then relaxed. He dismounted without hurry. He did not crowd her. His hands were empty. He looked at the blood on her shirt and at the smear where a rope had kissed her throat. His eyes were dark and level. She reached for the knife in her boot. He saw the move and stopped, half a breath away. "I can walk," she said. He glanced at Bellwether's legs, at the angle of Ray's body against the mare, at the shadows stacking in the draws. "You can be carried," he said. He put one arm under her knees and one behind her back, light, and sure as if he had done this 100 times and could do it 100 more. She bristled, then let her head fall against his shoulder, because the sky was moving, and her legs no longer belonged to her. The bell ticked on his saddle as he lifted her into it. He led both horses with his hands low, following a line only he saw. The country folded inward. The wind lost its teeth. They slipped through a throat of rock and into a pocket of green. Madrone trees leaned over a thin thread of water. A single-room cabin sat where red sandstone rose like a wall. The place smelled like sage drying on a string, and wood smoke ground into old pine. The rider took her inside and set her on a narrow cot. He set a kettle on the iron stove and filled it from a bucket that sweated cold in the corner. He washed his hands in a bowl, the water clean and bright. He cut the shirt away from Ray's side with a small, sharp blade. She flinched when the cloth pulled free from dried blood. He did not apologize. He poured water that had not yet boiled over the groove the bullet had burned. He held the skin around the wound and cleaned it until blood ran clean and thin. He threaded a needle with light brown hair and set the edges together. His hands were steady. He did not look at her face. "What is your name?" she said, because the silence had shape and weight. "Ash," he said. He tied a knot and bit it off. "Lone Elk." She watched him cross the room to hang her gun belt high on a peg. The move was practical. It was also a line drawn. "You should not have touched that," she said. The words came out soft. There was no breath behind them. "It is clean now," he said. He set the belt so the holster faced the wall. He set a tin cup in her hand and lifted her wrist until the cup tipped into her mouth. Water went down like a prayer said by someone else. The kettle began to sing. He tossed dried leaves and a pinch of something bitter into a pot and poured the water over it. The smell filled the room, green and sharp with a trace of soil. He cut thin rabbit from a strip and let it sink. He did not pick up a spoon until the meat gave. "Drink this," he said. "I am not a child. You are shot." He moved around the room like a man who knew where everything lived and why. A rope hung neatly coiled. A whetstone sat by the stove. A single shelf held cups and a Bible black with soot. His rifle leaned in the corner, within reach of the bedroll laid near the door. He put the bowl to her lips. The broth was hot and clean, and it warmed a place that had been cold since morning. Outside the cabin, something shifted. The light turned the wrong color. Ash stood and opened the door a hand's width. The world beyond had gone yellow as old pages. He tasted the air once, then shut the door and dropped the latch. He pushed a table to the window and lifted a plank from beside the frame. He set it in place and began to nail. "What is it?" Ray said. "Dust," he said, "a bad one." He rolled cloth and soaked it, then pushed it into the cracks where floor met wall. The first breath of wind was a whistle under the door. The second breath hit the cabin full a fist of sand that found the tongue and eyes and the edges of every board. The day went dark in the space of a heartbeat. The stove rattled. The plank creaked. The air became a thing to chew. Ash worked by feel and habit. He tied the door latch with a strip of rawhide. He set the kettle on again, then sat on his heels and sharpened a knife. The scrape of steel on stone made a steady sound that cut the wind in two. Ray lay back and watched dust drift down in fine curtains that turned the air to fog. She coughed. Her ribs pulled hard around the place where he had sewn her. "You can sleep," he said. "I do not sleep," she said. The storm turned the afternoon into a night with teeth. The cabin swam and steadied with each gust. When the pot sang dry, he answered it and set it to sing again. He put the bowl in her hands when her fingers shook, and guided it when they steadied. He did not ask what had happened in Cuervo Flats. He did not say he did not care. He chose not to know. Ray drifted in and out. Memory came in flashes. Boone's hands on her arms, the smell of kerosene behind the saloon, the sting of rope under her ear. She woke with her throat tight and her hands clawing for the knot. Ash was there without a word to set her wrists back on the blanket and to lay a folded towel under her neck. He poured a little water and let her wet her mouth. "I do not owe you," she said. It came from a place in her that had survived by saying it. "You are breathing," he said again. He slept finally curled on the floor by the door, with his rifle on its sling and a blanket pulled to his shoulders. The wind spoke through the gaps in the walls. Sand found them both. Ray watched the dark until the dark went thin. The storm limped itself to pieces by morning. Silence fell like ash. He pried the plank from the window. Daylight pushed in clear and hard. The sky had been scrubbed to a blue that looked cold enough to drink. The world outside wore a new skin. Dunes had shifted a handspan. Tracks were gone. The madrone leaves were edged in dust. Ray sat up too fast and the room dipped. Ash was already there, one hand under her elbow. His palm was warm and rough. He took it away as soon as she found the cot. He poured coffee so black it smelled like burned earth. He set the tin on the table between them. He did not drink until she steadied both hands around hers. She touched the bandage on her side. It pulled. She felt weak and hated it. "Where am I?" she said. "Pocket," he said. "Mine." "Thank you," she said, and then swallowed the word because it felt like a collar. He stood, took a clean shirt from a peg, and handed it to her, without looking at her face. He stepped outside to give her the room. The light from the doorway painted the floor a bright square. She pulled the shirt over her head and found she could lift her arms if she went slow. When she was done, she sat and watched her hat on the peg beside her gun belt. She looked at the belt until the edges of the leather went soft and far. Ash came back in with a bundle of juniper twigs and a string of small fish. He had eyes that told nothing and everything. He set the fish on the table and took a pan from a nail and moved like time was no one's enemy. Ray stood. Her knees felt like someone else's. She made it to the door. The pocket opened in front of her. The little stream threw light. The rock walls kept their own counsel. A stand of sycamore showed pale trunks like bones. She heard the water and took a step toward it. "Careful," Ash said. "The bank breaks." She stopped and put her hand to the doorframe to keep the ground from sliding. She could feel the grain of the wood in her palm and the callus that had grown there from years of rains and knives. The rope mark at her neck itched. She scratched it and dropped her hand. "We are not acquaintances," she said. "You do not own me." Ash sat on the step with the pan across his knees. He did not look up right away. He picked a scale from his thumb and flicked it. He nodded once. "I do not collect people," he said. He set the fish to cook with sage and a little salt. The smell lifted into the clean air. He ate standing the way men do when food is fuel. He left the cot to her and the bedroll to himself again when the sun dropped a hand and the rock cooled. He put a hand to the window plank to check the fit and checked the latch on the door, not because he was afraid, but because he knew how to live. Ray lay back and watched the smoke from the stove drift and flatten against the rafters. When she closed her eyes, the sound of water worked at the edges of her sleep. She turned on her side and found a position that did not pull her stitches. She did not thank him again. She did not curse him. The room breathed. The horses in the lean-to breathed. She matched them one count, then another, until the night met her where she lay. Morning found the pocket rinsed and clean. The storm had scrubbed the sky to a hard blue, and the rock shone where the light touched it. Ray sat on the cot with a tin cup, and the smell of coffee lifting from it. Her hands were not steady. She tried to pour from the kettle anyway. The cup tipped. Ash's hand closed over hers before it could spill. His palm was warm. He kept the kettle steady with his other hand and finished the pour. He let go as soon as the cup was safe on the table. "I can do it," Ray said. "I know," he said. They ate fish cold from the pan and heel bread that tasted of smoke. After Ash stepped into the lean-to, he checked the bay's hooves and then bellwethers, ran a hand along fetlocks, picked out sand with the tip of a short knife, and talked to the horses under his breath. Ray stood long enough to feel the pull of stitches. She crossed slowly to the table, cleaned her pistol with a rag that smelled of oil, and laid each part in order. The world had form again. It was a room, a stream, a strip of shade, a man who moved to the work that kept a place alive. By midday, the heat was back, softer on the edges, but honest. Ray walked to the stream with a bar of lye soap. She eased herself into the water and let it take her weight. It climbed cold up her legs and past her thighs. Her breath hissed. The current tugged at her shirt and the bandage at her ribs. She undid the knot and peeled the cloth away. Water darkened the stain and carried it down past stones and willow roots. She leaned back until the sun warmed her face and the stream pulled at her hair. A twig cracked. Not the light sound of a bird, a heavier weight. She turned her head. Ash stood at the bend among the willows with the light behind him. His rifle rested against his leg. He had no expression at all. Ray did not drop her gaze. She stood in the pool and let the water run off her skin. The air touched the rope scar at her throat, and it felt raw again. Ash's eyes found it. He took a breath through his nose and started to turn away. "You like the view," Ray said. Her voice skipped across the water and came back flat. He faced her again. He kept his eyes level. He did not smile, and he did not look down. "I will leave you be," he said. "No," she said. "Stay." She walked toward him out of the pool over the slippery stones up to the bank where the mud felt warm. Droplets slid across her shoulders and along the line of her ribs. She did not cover herself. She stopped close enough to see the stubble on his jaw and the small line at the corner of his mouth that appeared when he ground his teeth. "This is what men want," she said. "They stare and they take. Tell me what you want." Ash lifted his hand. He did not touch her. His fingers hovered an inch from her throat. His thumb traced the air where the rope had bitten. His eyes stayed on the scar, not on the rest of her. "No," he said. His voice came out rough like a boot on gravel. "It chains me." He dropped his hand and stepped back through the willows. The leaves shook and then were still. Ray stood in the sun with the water running off her and felt something press against the inside of her chest that was not anger and was not fear. She picked up the bandage and washed it clean, tied it back, and went inside. The afternoon stretched thin. Ash mended a cheek strap with a rawhide lace. Ray wiped dust from the stove and from the shelf and from the rim of the window. The dust never runs out in a place like this. She changed the rag when it turned the color of old brick. When the light fell, Ash set a pot on with beans and sage. Ray watched the rise and fall of his shoulders. He watched the slow bubble of the pot. They ate at the table, not facing each other. The kit on the wall hung in a straight line. The latch on the door clicked when he checked it. Night came in and sat with them. She unrolled a blanket by the hearth. He unrolled his bed near the door. The stove ticked as it cooled. One of the horses stamped and then settled. Ray lay on her back and watched the rafters and the slant of light that came through a crack high in the wall. Her heartbeat made a hush in her ears. She turned on her side and faced the fire. Footsteps crossed the floor. Not stealthy, not soft. They stopped behind her. She felt him there as a weight in the room. "I can sleep in the barn," he said. "Do not," she said. He knelt and slid onto the blanket beside her. She turned and met him halfway because there was no room in her for any more distance. Their hands found places that made sense. His mouth was hard and hungry. Hers answered. There were no words. The blanket pulled and the floor was rough and the smell of sage and smoke mixed with sweat. It was not gentle. It was not elegant. It burned through and left a silence that felt like the air after lightning. He rolled away at once and lay with his back to her. The fire put a copper edge on his shoulder and the strong line of his neck. Ray lay with her eyes open. She did not feel clean and she did not feel dirty. She felt present. She felt the same as when a horse under her gathered itself and ran without fear. He stood before dawn and went outside. The door clicked. Ray watched the square of gray grow on the floor. Her throat tightened and then eased. She stood and dressed and tied her hair back and went to the stream to wash her face in the cold. When she came back, he was at the table cleaning his rifle. The action opened the small parts laid careful on a cloth. He did not look at her. She cleaned her pistol again, though it did not need it. The sound of rag on steel filled the cabin and made a rhythm that matched the sound of water on stone outside. A jingle drifted in from the canyon mouth. Bells on a mule team. Both of them stood at the same time. Ash set the rifle down and crossed to the door. Ray put her hand to her hip and stepped to the side of the window. A mule wagon eased into the pocket, with the sun behind it and dust in its spokes. Ephraim Pike set the brake with a lever and laughed out loud at the sight of Ash. "You hard to kill lone elk," he said. "Thought you were just a story men tell to make the road go quicker." Ash took the lead rope and tied it to a post. "Goods," he said. Always Pike said. He was all elbows and beard and a grin that looked permanent. He climbed down and slapped dust from his vest. He pointed a thumb at Ray standing by the corner of the cabin. "And you got a shadow?" "Just passing through," Ash said. "Sure," Pike said. His eyes moved without a twitch. He smelled the room and the stream and the powder oil and built a picture. He tipped his hat to Ray as if she had told him a joke, and he wanted to be polite about it. They traded on the wagon bed. Ash brought out a stack of pelts tied with a thong, coyote, 2 fox, a string of rabbit skins. Pike pressed his thumb into each one and named a price in coffee flour salt. He lifted a box of cartridges with both hands and set it down soft. Ray watched the exchange and kept her back to the wall. Pike did not hurry. The bell on the lead mule ticked when the animal shook its head. Pike leaned in close to Ash at the end as if he meant to share a story about weather. Ray could hear the words anyway because he was one of those men who whispered with his chest. "Notice from the north," he said. 600 on a half-breed girl. Ray Delgado. Shot Boone Riker out behind the red spoke. They want her fast and quiet." The mayor added cream on top. Ash did not look at Ray. He looked at the wagon bed and then at Pike. "Not my business," Pike said. He lifted a sack of flour as if his hands needed something to do. "But that kind of paper brings wasps. They look under rocks. They look in pockets." Ray felt her mouth go dry. The rope mark at her throat throbbed once. She kept her face still. She watched Ash pick up the flour and set it inside. She watched him set the coffee on the shelf. She watched him stack the cartridges in a row. His movements did not change. His breath did not catch. Pike tied his load with practiced hands. "See you on the far end of the summer," he said. He clicked to the mules. The wagon wheel found the rut and rolled out of the pocket. The bell sang until the canyon mouth took the sound. Silence filled the space he left. Ray put her palm on the table and felt the grain rise under the skin. She looked at her gun belt on the peg, and then at the door, and then at Ash. He stood with his hands on the back of a chair. He let out a breath and took another. "Do not put my gun out of reach again," Ray said. "It is clean," he said. He stepped past her and pulled the canvas over the haystack, secured it with a tie. He brushed dust from his palms. The sky above the rock was so blue it hurt. The stream made its steady sound. Ray went to the peg and buckled the belt around her hips. The leather creaked. She felt its weight settle low and familiar. She turned and faced the doorway. Ash was already moving to the work at hand. He gathered tools, checked the cinch on the bee, and set a bucket under the eaves where the shade held. Ray's side ached where the bullet had grazed a hot line under skin. She adjusted the bandage and stood a little taller. The pocket held them like a shell. The world outside did not care what lived inside it. The light shifted and laid new angles on the doorway and the window. Ray breathed slow until the breath came easy again. The day carried on. Pike's bell faded into the rock and left only the stream. Ash stacked the flour and coffee, then stepped out to the corral. Ray followed with a slow pull in her side. The light had gone pale and sharp after the storm, like a knife set under water. Bellwether lifted her head when Ray touched her neck. The mare's eye was clear. Ray let her palm rest there a breath longer than needed. "Teach me," she said. Ash looked at her, then at the country beyond the pocket. He nodded once and picked up 2 iron traps from a peg. He tied them to his saddle with short, neat lengths of rawhide. He slung a pouch across his shoulder that smelled like trouble and old blood. They rode along the dry wash where mesquite had thrown roots into rock. Ash led and did not talk. He stopped where the dust told a story. He crouched and set a finger along a small crescent pressed into the earth. "Coyote," he said, moving light hunting alone. Ray crouched beside him. The print looked like nothing at first, then like a thought half heard. He set the trap in the shade of a thorn bush. He pressed the plate down until the jaws whispered and held. He sifted sand over the iron, then pinched a foul paste from the pouch and smeared it on a chip of rock downwind. "What is in that?" Ray said. "Rot," he said, "and secrets." They set 2 more where narrow paths crossed and the ground held prints. The work had a rhythm. Neil press cover mark. Ray's hands learned the feel of sand over steel. Her side tugged and then eased as work took her out of herself. They checked snares for rabbits along a line of sage. Ray learned to see what was hidden, the bend of a grass stem, a hair left on wire. The day tilted. Heat rose. The hills went blue at the edges. When they turned back, the first trap held a coyote. It stood with one paw gripped, and its eyes bright with pain and fury. It did not whine. It showed teeth and stared at them like a person might. Ray reached for her knife. "No," Ash said. "You save the fur." He moved quick and clean. One blow to the skull. The animal folded as if the earth had relaxed. Dust lifted, then settled. Ray stood very still and looked at the coyote, at the thin ribs, at the paw, in the iron mouth. She knelt, because Ash had knelt, and because there was work to finish. He showed her where to cut, how to work the blade flat between skin and flesh, how to pull with the offhand so the edge could glide. Blood warmed her fingers. The skin came free the way a shirt slides off a shoulder. Ash salted the hide and rolled it tight. They rode home with the pelt tied behind his saddle. Ray kept her eyes on the line of Ash's back, and on the way the bay placed its feet. The country changed from glare to glow. Long shadows made the ground look cool. Kites circled high against the late light. The pocket took them in. Ash stretched the hide on a frame near the lean-to. He washed his hands in the stream and left pink swirls that thinned and vanished. Ray washed after him and watched her own water run red to clear. She looked at her fingertips, at the dirt settled in the lines, at skin rubbed raw where rope had been. She closed her hand and opened it again until the ache felt like hers. "Tomorrow at sunup," Ash said. "Traps spoil in heat." Ray looked toward the ridge above the pocket. The sky there held a thin seam of cloud that would be empty by morning. She nodded. She did not thank him. He did not expect it. They ate rabbit and beans with sage while the world turned copper. Ash cleaned the knife with a square of cloth and set the blade to the stone twice. Ray put the plates in a tin pan and set them by the door. The night came in cool and smelled like dust laid down by dew. The stove ticked as it cooled. A horse blew softly in sleep. "Come," Ash said. He took a lantern from a nail and led the way up the slope behind the cabin. The trail was not a trail, only a memory in his feet. They climbed through scrub oak that grabbed at their clothes and over slick rock warm from the day. The lantern made a small gold island around their boots. Everything beyond it was black and starred. They slipped through a narrow crack where the rock breathed cool. The air changed. The light from the lantern touched a wall, and the wall answered. Red and ochre figures ran across the stone. Deer a bison-shaped, men with antlers, hands. Hands everywhere, small and large, open-splayed, layered thick as leaves. Ray stopped. The lantern threw her shadow up among the painted lives. She set her palm against a print the size of a child's. The rock was cold under her skin. Her breath slowed. Something in her backed up and sat down. "My father brought me," Ash said. His voice did not echo. It lay on the stone and stayed, before he died. Ray did not ask how or when. She stood with the light on her face and looked until the looking filled her. Ash set the lantern on a ledge and picked up a shallow stone bowl. Powder slept in it, the color of blood clotted and ground. He tipped a little clean water in and stirred with his finger until it turned to paste. He held the bowl out. Ray dipped her left hand. The paste was cold and gritty. She wiped it over her palm and along her fingers. She held her hand up once as if to see if it was still hers, then pressed it flat to the wall, where the rock made a small hollow. The stone took her heat. She held for a count the length of a breath, and a second more. She eased away. The print stood dark and new beside the old ones. She felt a pull under her breastbone, as if some wire she had wound tight there had let go a little. She wiped her hand on her shirt and did not care about the stain. She turned to Ash. He was not watching her face. He watched the wall like a man reading names. She touched her throat where the rope had laid its mark. It itched as if it wanted to say something and could not. She let her hand drop. "I am here," she said. The words were quiet. They did not need to be louder. Ash lifted the lantern. The flame shook once in the draft and then steadied. They went back down into night. At the cabin, he took a long lock of hair from the bay's tail and another from Bellwether's. He twisted the hairs together until they made a cord thin and strong. He split a strip from an old bridle and cut it clean with the knife. He braided leather and hair in 3 strands, the 2 colors running side by side. His hands moved without thought. The braid grew under his fingers. He tied it off with a knot that would not slip. He held the thing a moment in both hands as if to weigh it. Then he offered it across the table. He did not make a speech. Ray looked at the braid. She took it and turned it so the 2 horse colors showed smoke and dun. The leather was warm from his hands. She did not fasten it around her wrist. She sat on the edge of the cot, pulled off her right boot, and tied the braid snug around her ankle. The knot lay smooth against her bone. She tucked it under the cuff of her trousers. The leather pressed light and certain against her skin. Ash watched her do it and looked away. He banked the coals in the stove with a flat of ash. He leaned the knife where it lived and checked the door latch with his palm. He unrolled his bed near the door. The room settled. Ray lay down and felt the small weight at her ankle. She thought of the hand on the wall above the canyon and of the coyote's eyes going bright and then still. She breathed in smoke and sage and the thin thread of water singing to itself outside. The scar at her throat no longer burned. It itched like a place that was healing. She slept without fighting it. The pocket held. The stars went their old ways above the rock. The stream kept its count. The new hand on the stone dried to a dark red and stayed. The next morning broke soft and bright on the rock. Ray tugged her boot on and felt the small braid at her ankle settle in place. Ash saddled the bay and checked Bellwether's back with a palm slow and careful. The pocket kept its quiet as they rode out hooves oft in the dust, where the stream lost itself and the canyon opened. Calico Station sat on a low rise where the road bent toward the mines. A windmill ticked. The porch held crates and a barrel marked kerosene. The smell reached them before they tied off. Coffee axle grease, lamp oil, old leather. A bell over the door gave a tired ring when they stepped in. The room was long and dim. Shelves stacked with flour-canned peaches, nails, cartridges. A clerk with round shoulders and a sunburnt nose counted beans into a scoop and did not look up. 2 miners hunched over a game of checkers, their voices barely above the scrape of wood on wood. A green lamp on the counter sweated oil. Ray kept to the left of the door with her hat low and her hands easy. Ash moved to the counter and said his list with words more shape than sound. 50 pounds flour, coffee, salt, cartridges, a length of rawhide. The clerk counted with his mouth open and set each thing in a neat row. Ash paid with pelts and a little coin. Ray felt the room change the way a horse feels weather. A man in a gray duster stood near the ammunition case drinking coffee from a tin cup. His face was narrow and smooth, where the sun had not touched it. His eyes did not bounce. They landed. He studied Ash, then slid his gaze to Ray. It stuck there. He put the cup down without sound. His hand went inside his coat. Ray lifted her chin and moved her hip enough to free leather. She saw Ash's hand in her periphery. His fingers closed on the grip of his pistol like a man picking up a tool he had made himself. The gray coat cleared the man's holster. He was fast and clean. He fired once. Plaster leaped from the doorframe by Ray's ear. Ash's shot came a breath later and hit where men die. The man looked surprised, as if the room had not agreed with his math. He folded into a barrel of crackers that broke open and poured white discs across the floor. Amos, someone shouted from the back. A second man stepped out of shadow with a shotgun. Ray already had her pistol up. The first shot caught splinters from the door. The second took the man in the shoulder. He screamed, and the shotgun fired itself into the floor, tearing a hole that showed dirt and daylight. "Go," Ash said. He swept the flour into his arms and let it fall. It was only weight now. They moved. The clerk dove behind his counter. The miners became ghosts. Ray ran with Ash through a narrow hall that smelled of soap and lamp oil. A door banged open into a yard of scrap and rain barrels. They kept low. Ray's side burned. A bullet hummed and died in the woodpile. Ash kicked a crate out of their way and vaulted a fence with a hand on the top rail. Ray climbed and dropped breath-ragged and found her feet in weeds as tall as her knees. They cut along the back lot to the lane. The horses danced when they came in sight. Ray took Bellwether's rein with a sound that was not a word. Ash swung up and covered while she mounted. They broke for the road at a hard clip dust rolling off the wheel ruts and sheets. No one followed far. A man yelled something that did not carry. A shot cracked and went nowhere. Calico Station shrank behind them to a roofline and a windmill. The bell over the door rang weakly in the wind, as if the building itself had taken a breath it could not hold. They did not talk on the ride back. Ray's heart pounded in her ears, then settled into the rhythm of Bellwether's stride. The country changed from mine road to open land. The sun climbed and then slid. The heat pressed like a hand. Ray watched the horizon for dust and saw only air shaking over stone. They reached the mouth of the pocket when the light had gone white again. The first thing Ray smelled was not water. It was smoke that had burned hay and pitch and hot iron. Bellwether's ears went forward and then flat. Ash brought the bay to a stand and did not move right away. The air tasted bitter. The barn was a black shape that had fallen in on itself. Timbers lay cracked. A panel of roofing tilted still, sending up thin threads of smoke. The heat in the ruin made the air ripple. The lean-to roof was gone. The beam Ash had set last month lay half-burned, half-raw, like a bone. Ash dismounted with the reins in his hand. He stood at the edge of the ash and looked at the big charred pieces until the shapes sorted themselves. He crouched and touched a beam with the back of his fingers to test heat, and then touched the ground near the door where Prince would last. He did not speak. Ray slid down and came up beside him. The world narrowed to details. A heel pattern with a broken lug, a small nick on a boot's edge, 3 different sizes, 4 if she counted the man who dragged something heavy. The drag stopped at the doorway. The prince went back out again. No bodies, no horses, only a message burned into the heart of the place. Ray stepped back and pressed her knuckles to her mouth. Her eyes burned with smoke, and something older. She had brought this. The pocket had been quiet, and now it was marked. Ash stood. He looked at the cabin. The door still hung straight. The window plank leaned against the wall. The stream ran as if it could not hear. He crossed to the threshold and took a match from his pocket. He held it a moment between finger and thumb. He struck it against the heel of his boot. The sound was small and certain. He tossed the match onto the cot. The blanket caught as if it had been waiting. Flame crawled along the weave, then ran. He walked to the lean-to and set fire to the canvas covering the stacked hay. He did not watch it take. "Why?" Ray said. Her voice cut more than the smoke did. "It is wood," he said. He looked at her, then and she saw the thing behind his eyes that was not fear and not anger. It was a boundary chosen and held. The fire climbed the cabin wall and found the dry joints. The room inside went to light. The shelf with its black Bible and the neat row of cups tipped and fell together. Smoke pushed hard through the window gap and then loosened. A spar from the roof dropped and sent a fountain of sparks into the air. The smell of pine and old ash and rope filled the pocket until it was all Ray could taste. She stood with her hand on her belt and watched a world come apart in a clean line. The braid at her ankle pressed against her skin. She felt it and did not look down. Ash stepped back to stand beside her, his hands empty, his shoulders square. When the roof fell in, it fell with a sound that shook the air in her throat. Flame poured up and then sank low. The stream kept its voice. The madrone leaves turned their pale sides to the heat. Ash went to the corral and untied what could still be used. A shovel, a pick. The traps leaned against a post. He took each one and set it by the horses. He found the tin of coffee where it had been set on the shelf and had somehow failed to burn. He tucked it into a saddlebag. He did not hurry and he did not waste motion. Ray walked to the place where they had framed the hide to dry. It had been spared by distance and chance. She lifted it from the frame and rolled it tight. The salt still crusted the edges. Her hands moved without thought. She brought it to the horses and tied it behind a saddle. Heat worried the air for a long time. The cabin settled to coals and black beams. Ash watered the horses from the bucket that had been under the eaves. The water had grit in it. The animals drank anyway. Ray drank from her palm and spat ash. They saddled in the late light. The pocket was no longer a room. It was a bowl with a scar. Ray put her foot in the stirrup and found the seat as Bellwether shifted under her. Ash swung on to the bay and set his hat low. They sat a count and looked at what burned. Ash did not turn his head when he wheeled the bay. Ray let Bellwether find the line out. The canyon held smoke against the rock and sent it upward in a slow ribbon. At the mouth of the pocket, the wind shifted. Something dry clicked in the grass near Ray's boot. A sound like beads shaken once and then stilled. Bellwether's ear turned and came back. Ray looked down and saw only stones and seed heads. They rode into the open, the air cleaner with every length. The sun broke low and hard along the ridge and threw the country into long light. Ray felt the pull in her side and the weight at her ankle and the taste of smoke on her tongue. She set her body to the saddle and kept the horses in a steady trot along the low ground where the scrub held a little shade and the wind lay flat. The pocket fell behind them until it was only a bright place on the land where heat moved and the air wavered like water. They kept to the gray hours when the light goes loose on the land. At dawn, Ray let Bellwether walk with her head low. At dusk, she asked more. Midday, they crawled into the slice of shade a mesquite could give, and lay still horses tied to roots, water sipped in thimble mouthfuls. The sun pressed the world flat. Heat rose in a visible skin. The horizon shook. Ray counted swallows from the canteen, and then stopped counting. The rope burn along her neck itched and then went quiet. Ash said little. He watched the ground and the sky and the shape of wind. The desert talked in a language he knew in his bones. He set their line south by broken rock and the way grass leaned. On the fourth noon, they found a clutch of boulders that gave a scrap of shadow large enough for both horses and two bodies. The air there had forgotten the last hour of heat. Ray led Bellwether in and loosened the latigo. Ash squatted by the bay's right foreleg and ran his hand down the tendon. He checked the hoof for a trapped zone and found none. A sound lifted from the dust, not loud. A dry sound like seeds in a gourd. It came from under the overhang where the sand looked smooth. The bay's skin twitched along the ribs. Ray's throat went tight. Ash turned his head eyes flicking to the shadow and shifted his weight to rise. The rattlesnake came like a thrown rope, a pale blur. It struck with its mouth open and found Ash's calf above the boot top. Two neat holes, a dark shine. Ash fell back with a curse that had no heat in it, just air forced through teeth. He kicked, and the snake coiled again. He drew and fired from the ground. The head vanished into dust and meat. Ray was already at his leg. She tore her kerchief free and knotted it high on his thigh. She found a stick and torqued the knot until the muscle stood and the veins went hard. Ash leaned on his elbows. His face had gone the color of clay. "Leave me," he said. "Shut up," she said. She took his knife when he handed it to her. She pressed the point into one puncture and pulled a line shallow across to the other. Blood welled, dark and thick. She put her mouth to it. The taste was metal and rot and bitter earth. She spat and went again. Her lips went numb. She worked until the blood ran red and thin, and her jaw trembled. Ash's breath came in lengths. His eyes filmed and cleared and filmed again. He tried to sit. His hands shook. The leg was already swelling against the leather. Ray loosened the boot, then tugged it off with both hands, while he bit the heel of his palm to stop sound. She tore a strip from her shirt and packed the cut. "Cave," she said. "Shade." She looped his arm over her shoulders and stood into him. He was taller and heavier than she was, but he bent to her and moved when she moved. They found a low washout in the side of a hill, a little mouth of cool air where old water had tunneled and gone. Ray lowered him inside and covered the opening with brush until the light went dim and the heat fell away. She ran for the horses and came back with both canteens and the bedrolls. She pulled the boot back from the swelling limb and unknotted the kerchief a turn. She poured a capful of water onto his lips and watched his throat work. She set a damp cloth on his neck and on the swollen calf. The skin there had gone tight and glossy. It looked wrong against his other leg like a log beside a branch. "Look at me," she said when his eyes started to roll. "Stay here?" "Always trying," he said. His smile was a ghost and then gone. The fever came when the sun went down. It burned without mercy. Ash muttered words in a tongue Ray did not know. Names grew from the dark and fell back in. He reached for someone not in the cave and then for air. Once he said a word in Spanish, and Ray heard it even in the mumble, "Corazón." She put her hand on his chest to feel the heart count. It was fast and thin and there. Ray rationed the laudanum down to drops, enough so he would breathe without tearing himself, not enough to send him under and let him drown in his own heat. She changed the cloth when it warmed. She sucked again at the cut and spat in the sand. Her mouth tasted of coin and sage. Her jaw ached. The horses stayed near heads, low tails twitching at flies. Once Bellwether nickered a small sound like a question. Ray crawled out in the blue before dawn and rubbed the mare's face and put her forehead to the bone between the eyes. She fed the animals a handful of grain while their ribs showed in the slant of light. She took one swallow from the canteen and swilled it around her mouth. She did not swallow the second. She went back into the cave where Ash had sweated the blanket dark. She sat with her back against the earth and counted the seconds between his breaths. When his mouth dried and cracked, she wet it with a strip of cloth. When his hands clawed at the air, she put her palms over his and pressed until the fight left them both for a time. On the second night, he went quiet in a way that scared her more than the fever. The stillness sat heavy on the cave. She pressed her ear to his chest and heard it. Soft. Far. Still there. She closed her eyes and let something old and hard inside her soften. She spoke to him without thinking about it. Spanish when the English felt too sharp. Stay. You hear me? Do not leave me in here alone. The words came out rough and hot. They fell into the space between them and stayed. Near dawn, his skin cooled under her hand. The breath eased. The tremor in his muscles let go. He opened his eyes. They were not the eyes of a man raving. They were Ash's eyes again. He took a long breath and grimaced. His mouth tried to smile and turned into a wince. You were loud, he said. It came as a whisper. Drink, she said. He swallowed and coughed. He closed his eyes and opened them again. He lifted his hand and let his fingertips find her cheek. The touch was light as dust. He said something soft. She did not know the Mescalero word. She knew what it meant. Do not, she said. Her voice shook and she hated that. Stay quiet. He slept like a man coming back from a far place. Ray sat with him until the slit of light at the cave mouth turned gold. She let herself sleep then, and starts with her hand on his chest to feel the rise and fall. The next day she cut a pole and made a crutch from a forked limb. She wrapped his foot with a strip of cloth and threaded lace through the boot until it held wider. The swelling had started to ease. The skin showed livid and mottled where the venom had worked. He stood with the crutch and ground his teeth and did not yelp. She got him to the horses in 2 rests. She set him on the bay with the crutch tied to the saddle. She mounted Bellwether and took both reins. They moved south again in a slow line. Ash kept the weight on his good leg. Ray watched his face and the sweat on his lip and did not ask him to talk. The river lay somewhere ahead behind a screen of heat and haze. They reached it at nightfall. The Rio Grande rolled wide and brown under a sky that held 1,000 knives of light. Cottonwoods rustled along the bank. A coy dog yipped and fell silent. Ray led Bellwether into the shallows and felt the pull of water on her calves. The mud sucked at her boots and let go. She went deeper. The current took the mare to a swim. Ray grabbed the mane and leaned forward. The horse found the far slope and came up dripping. Ash and the bay crossed on a slant, the bay's nostrils high, the crutch bumping against the saddle with each surge. They climbed the bank into Mexico and stood a moment to breathe. The air on that side did not change, but Ray did. She felt it in her spine. She wiped water from her eyes with the back of her hand. The night smelled like wet cottonwood and dust that had cooled. San Miguel de las Palomas was a string of low houses around a square of hard-packed earth. Paper lanterns hung from a line. A guitar pushed a tune into the dark. Don Mateo Alvarez kept a cantina with a blue door and a virgin candle on a shelf that had seen more smoke than light. He squinted at them when they stepped inside. He saw the woman with a gun on her hip and the man with Apache in his face and pain in his leg. He made the sign of the cross once quick and private and lifted the counter flap. Back room, he said. Water, then stew. The room held a bed with a clean cotton sheet and a crucifix above it. The window had a curtain that moved like breath. Ray sat Ash on the bed and took off his boot and set his leg on a folded blanket. Don Mateo brought a clay jar of water and a bottle with a rope of dark sediment in it. Drink slow, he said. Laurel leaf, a little. He watched the way Ash swallowed and the way Ray watched him. He left them with bowls of goat stew and tortillas that steamed. The stew tasted like lime and bay, and the kind of hunger that makes a person honest. In the morning, Don Mateo came with papers. He set them on the table with a tap of his finger. Senor and Senora Perez, he said. Durango, looking for work. Ray looked at the names and saw her face wear them. Ash sat quiet eyes on the window and the line of bright day under the curtain. You stay a week, Don Mateo said, then gone. Ray dipped her head. Gracias. He shrugged, as if he had not heard thanks from anyone in a long time, and did not know where to put it. He came back that afternoon with a package wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to Ash, who passed it to Ray without a word. She unwrapped a red dress the color of a mesquite bloom at sundown. It was simple cotton, with seams that had been stitched with care. She held it up and saw herself in the window glass. Short hair, rope scar, a dress that asked nothing and promised warmth against the skin. That night, the square filled with laughter and music. Lanterns swung and painted circles on faces. Children ran and made dust. The smell of tamales and sugar burned Ray's tongue. She wore the dress. It fit close at the waist and fell straight. She stepped out of the room and stopped, because Ash was waiting, and had cut his beard to a clean line and put on a shirt without holes. They stood one breath apart and looked at each other, as if the other person was a landscape seen from a new ridge. Ash held out his hand. She put her hand in his. He led her into the circle of light, where the guitar climbed and the fiddle followed. He set his palm at her back, low and steady. She moved with him. It was awkward for a minute, and then it was not. He turned her and caught her, and she laughed a sound that felt like water over stone. They danced until the music slipped into something slower and the lanterns burned low. They walked back to the room with the candle still lit on the table. The air smelled of wax and night flowers and heat held in walls. Ash touched her cheek with the back of his fingers and set his mouth to hers. It was not hard. It was careful. It went deep. She answered him with both hands at his shoulders. They lay together without hurry. No one reached for words they did not need. Breath and skin and the small noises a person makes when they stop bracing. He said it after in the quiet, when her head lay on his chest and his hand smoothed her hair. "I love you, Ray." He said it as if he had carried the words a long way and was setting them down at last. She did not say it back. Her throat closed and her eyes filled, and she let her hand rest over his heart and felt it beat against her palm. Morning brought light under the door and a knock. Don Mateo stood there with his hat in his hands. "A rider from El Paso," he said. "3 gringo cazadores crossed last night. They asked for a woman with a scar on her neck and a man who looks like you." He did not come farther into the room. He let the words settle. The lantern in the square out front clicked as the last of its oil went cold. The red dress hung over the back of a chair and caught a stripe of sun. The room held the quiet that comes before a choice. Don Mateo stood with his hat in his hands, a heartbeat longer, then left them to the quiet. The red dress hung over the chair and caught a bar of light. The room smelled of lime and wax and dust, cooled by river air. Ray tied her hair back with a strip of cloth. The rope scar at her throat looked new again. Ash sat on the bed and flexed his bad leg until the pain settled into a place he could carry. He looked at Ray and then at the window. The curtain moved like breath. "No more running," he said. Ray's jaw tightened. Sidama Simbeji just tightened. "You think we simply ask a new town to forgive the last one? We make a town look at itself." Her laugh was small and raw. "They saw me in a noose and called it law." Ash reached for his boot and drew the laces until the leather held the swelling that remained. He stood with care. "There is a man in Cuervo Flats who owes me breath. He knows where the lines run." Ray stepped close enough to smell coffee on his shirt. "You go alone, and you do not come back. That is how those stories end. Then it will be a new story." She stared at him until the anger in her face thinned and left something older. She nodded once, hard. "No promises," she said. He took the papers Don Mateo had brought and slid them under the mattress. He lifted his hat and set it on straight. He put his hand to Ray's cheek. She leaned into his palm for a breath and then stepped away. He left before the sun climbed out of the river mist. The bay moved careful under him, at first then found the old stride. The crossing was colder in the dark. He made the north bank with a rope of mud climbing his boot and the smell of cottonwood filling his head. He set a line through the low hills and kept to the backs of things. Blue morning came up without heat. Sand took his tracks as he made them. Cuervo Flats woke into itself the way towns do. Smoke stuttered from cook stoves. Someone hammered a nail with a rhythm that said impatience. The red spoke sat quiet with its green lamp listing on the chain. Ash slid along the alley beside the tannery. The air there bit at the eyes. Urine and lime and old hide. He tapped once on a side wall with his knuckles. A knife point slid through a tear in the canvas and made a small, bright dot. "Save it," Ash said. The blade paused. A man's laugh came low. The canvas lifted. Eli Greeley stood there with the knife in his hand and a tan line at his throat where a scarf had lived too long. "I heard you burned to death," Eli said. "It was a good story." "Stories have holes," Ash said. Eli led him inside and dropped the canvas. The tannery shed was a box of heat and chemical and shadow. Hides hung like ghosts. A coil of wire sat in the corner. A telegraph key clicked faintly in the office beyond the wall. Eli turned the knife in his fingers because men like him always have to be doing something. "You come to sell me pelts or collect on a different debt," Eli said. "The second one," Ash said. "I need names and paper. Boone Riker. Maybe he wore another." Eli spat into a sawdust bucket. "Why would you ask that name and why would you ask it here?" "Because the room where you are is the room where lies end," Ash said. He did not sit. He stood with his weight easy on the good leg and let Eli look at him and see that his mind was already past the asking. Eli scratched his jaw and looked at the back wall as if words might be tacked there. Riker rides with men who do not fork a saddle unless money is tied to the horn. Cattle stolen south and sold north. Hale and Murdoch give it a pretty name and call it trade. I need a marshal's ink that says who he is and what he did, Ash said, and I need it fast. You ask a river to turn, Eli said. Hale owns the telegraph by owning the man with the key after dark. Then use the daylight, or use the man who owes you, Ash said. He let the words sit between them like a tool on a bench. Eli's mouth went tight the way mouths do, when men remember being thirsty, and someone with a calm voice offering a canteen. He wiped his knife on his pants and slid it into its sheath. Give me 2 nights, he said. Sleep in a hole and do not show your teeth. Today, Ash said. Eli's eyes narrowed. You ask a lot for a man who is not supposed to be breathing. This is the part where you do it anyway. Eli sighed like a man hearing a train he did not want to catch. He pushed through a split door and stepped into the office with the wire. The day operator wore spectacles and a shirt that had been white last week. Eli leaned in close and spoke very little. Money changed hands that Ash did not see. The key began to talk at speed. Texas came back in a scatter of metal syllables. The operator wrote fast, the pen squeaking, the paper turning gray where sweat from his wrists smeared ink. Eli read the flimsy and did not smile. He folded it and slipped it into his vest. Come on, he said. They walked out like nothing was wrong. The street showed them a collection of faces that tried not to look like what they were thinking. The Red Spoke's door was propped, and a broom leaned there. Eli did not pause. He cut behind the livery and through a yard where a dog lifted its lip and then looked away. In the shade of a cottonwood, he handed Ash the paper. The flimsy was thin and curled at the corners already. The words were plain and cold. Boone Riker, also Boone Rider, wanted in Texas. Murder, rustling, robbery of the El Paso and Southern. Reward $1,000. Ash turned the paper over. Eli handed him a second sheet without being asked. It was older and heavier, a wanted poster that had traveled with sweat and dust on it. The ink had faded brown at the edges. A clerk's hand had written received and a date 6 months back. Another hand had struck the words with a line and a note that said, Sheriff. They took this to Murdoch, Eli said. He took it to Hale. It never saw the board. Ash looked at the red spoke across the yard. He could smell kerosene already, a thin sweetness the wind carried from the door's lamp. He folded the papers and slid them under his shirt. You plan to stand up in a room and read, Eli said. You are tired of breathing. I plan to put a mirror in front of men and let them see what is on their faces, Ash said. You bring the girl, and they shoot her before you open your mouth. Ash met his eyes. You will bring the poster to the street, he said. If my breath stops, you hold it up anyway. Eli rubbed a hand over his mouth and then nodded once. God help me, he said. I always did like a good fire. Ash left the way he had come. He cut south through dry pasture, then into the low hills where Yucca threw up spears. He did not look back. The day fried to white. He found the river again by sound. He crossed when the light turned gold and the water took color. Mud climbed his boot and let go. Ray waited in a rocky cut that saw the wagon road but could not be seen from it. Bellwether lifted her head when she heard him. Ray stood and stepped into the light. She saw his face and knew before he spoke. Show me, she said. He handed her the flimsy and the poster. She read without moving her lips. The muscle at the corner of her jaw twitched. Her eyes went bright without wet. They knew, she said. He nodded. They dragged me under a tree and called it justice while they held this in their pocket, she said. He nodded again. She folded the papers along their old creases and kept folding until they were small enough to vanish in her hand. She slid them under her shirt where her skin was warm. We take it to the room where they said the words she said. Yes, Ash said. She looked out over the road and the hard, flat country and the small, thin line of town where the sky went white above a roofline. She touched the braid around her ankle through the leather of her boot. She did not look at him. He did not ask for that. They moved when the sun went down. The river crossed their boots again and left them with a chill that helped them breathe. They kept to the dark sides of things and the places where footsteps are only sound. Ash's leg complained and then learned the pace. Ray's side pulled and then let go. Night took them into its coat and walked with them. They made a cold clump in the hills above the town. No fire, no talk. Coyotes spoke and went quiet. A cart clattered once on the road and faded. Ray sat with her back to a rock and disassembled her pistol by touch, each piece laid in a small square of cloth, then returned. She did it twice until the movement was its own prayer. Ash checked the rifle. He ran a fingertip along the crown and the edge of the sight. He breathed slow until breath was a thing he could trust. He reached across the small space and set his hand on Ray's knee. She did not start. She set her hand over his for a count and then let go. The stars held their ground. The dark thinned. Dawn gave shape to the land a piece at a time. They saddled without hurry and gathered the silence they needed. Ray buckled her belt. The leather creaked. The weight sat where it should. She adjusted the knot in the bandage under her shirt until it did not bite. They stepped out of the cut and down toward the first fence post and the line of town beyond it. The air in front of them tasted like dust and oil and the memory of rope. The braid at Ray's ankle pressed light and certain against her skin. She let it anchor her and kept walking. Dusk put a brass edge on the rooftops. Ray and Ash left the horses a street over, where the alley held shade and smell of damp straw. The wind had gone still. Heat lay flat against the boards. Cuervo Flats gathered itself around the red spoke like flies around a sweet jar. Light showed through the saloon windows in a steady gold. A green lamp over the bat wings bled oil down its stem. The smell of kerosene went out into the street and hung there. Music tried to make a happy sound and failed. Laughter covered nerves. Bottles clinked. Someone shouted a toast and others answered to show they were not listening for trouble. Ray touched the braid under her boot and set her hat. Ash checked the rifle sling on his shoulder, then let his hand fall. They walked the last stretch as if they were two people easing into a crowd for a drink and a hand of cards. Bodies at the rail leaned to see better. A woman with powder on her cheek watched with her mouth open and forgot to close it. Sheriff Rand Murdoch stood half in shadow by the far wall, the weight of his badge pulling on his shirt pocket. Mayor Whitaker Hale took center light. He wore a frock coat and a gold chain and a smile that showed small teeth. The din fell in pieces when Ray and Ash crossed the threshold. By the time they reached the middle of the floor, the room was quiet enough to hear glass sweat on wood. Ray stopped just short of the long drag marks her boots had left weeks ago when men had pulled her toward the door. She looked at the bartender. He looked at the kerosene lamp as if it could tell him what to do. Halo lifted his hands. "Look at that," he said. "Two faces from a poster dropped right in our laps. Sheriff, take them." Murdoch did not move. His cigar had gone cold again. His eyes went to the crowd, then to Hale, then to the floor. Ray's voice cut clean through the room. "Boone Riker." Men shifted their weight. Chairs creaked. A bottleneck hit a glass and made a small bell of sound. "He was a wanted killer," Ash said. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. Texas Ink says, "Murder rustling train robbery. 1,000 on his head." Haley laughed. The sound fell off the walls and did not stick. "What Texas writes does not apply here," he said. "What applies here is a whore who shot a good man and a breed who hides her." Ray did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the bartender. "You were in the alley," she said. "You saw him lay hands on me." The bartender's throat worked. He wiped the same clean spot on the counter without seeing it. "I saw a thief," he said. "I saw a cheat." "You saw what you wanted to see," Ray said. "What you were paid to see." A man at a back table stood with the wrong kind of calm. Two more moved with him, not fast but sure. They made a line that cut the room. Hale's smile never touched his eyes. He raised his chin a fraction. The men's hands settled on their guns like cats on a warm stone. Ash slid his palm to the rifle and lifted it a hand's length, not enough to aim. Ray's thumb found the hammer on her pistol and eased it back. The click was soft. Everyone heard it. "Leave while you can," Murdoch said to no one and to everyone. His voice had a papery rasp. No one moved. Hawley lifted his voice so men on the sidewalk could hear. "This is proof enough," he said. "She comes in to stir trouble. He comes in with a rifle. Sheriff?" The bartender's lamp dripped another clear tear down the stem. The smell of oil was thick now. A man near the back door held a small can under his coat. Ray saw it. He slid away from the wall and vanished behind the curtain. Ash spoke without looking away from the line of guns. "Paper is coming," he said. "Marshall's wire. It passed through this office 6 months ago. The sheriff took it to you. It never saw a wall." Someone in the back swore. The piano player set his hands in his lap. Hale's jaw tightened. He glanced at Murdoch and then at the men who worked for him and thought he owned. "Do it," he said. The first shot tore a glass to powder by Ray's ear. Her own came right after. It took the wrist of the man who had reached for her. He screamed, and the bottle he was holding fell and broke like ice. Ash's shot crossed the room and put the second man into a table. Chairs went over, and the crowd tried to flee through one door. The bat wings jammed on bodies. Smoke leaped for the ceiling and flattened along it. The piano tipped. A kerosene can clanged on the floorboards. Someone poured the rest on the curtains, then flung a lit rag. Flame raced up the fabric and found the old wood of the transom. The room roared. Heat pushed hard at cheeks and eyes. The lamp over the bar swelled with light and let go. Broken glass showered the counter. Burning oil ran in bright lines along the grain. Back someone shouted, "Burn them out!" Ash grabbed Ray by the arm and moved. Bullets took chunks from the bar just above where their shoulders had been. He fired twice on the way and made men duck when ducking was all they had. Ray dropped low and ran the last 3 strides to the front window. The glass caught her shoulder and held for a breath, then went with a crash. She tasted dust and oil and wood smoke all together. "Go," Ash said behind her. She set her hands on the sill and heaved. The alley air hit her lungs like water. A shot went through the sash and nicked her hat brim. Feet thumped behind. Men coughing, men yelling. The floor held under her hands and then trembled when something heavy fell. She put one leg over the sill. A man in the smoke lifted his pistol and leveled it at her spine. She saw him in the glass as a shape and knew anyway. She started to turn to shoot and felt Ash's hands slam her between the shoulder blades. She flew clean through the window frame and landed on the boardwalk hard enough to see sparks. The breath left her and then came back like fire. The shot meant for her went home in Ash. The sound Ash made was not loud. His body jerked as if a rope had been yanked, then folded to one knee. The rifle fell and slid. He put his hand on the floor and it left a clean red print, fingers spread, then smeared as he tried to push up. Ray crawled back through glass. Heat washed her face. Flame chewed the curtains off the rods and reached for the ceiling. "Ash," she said. She did not know she had said anything. He tried to stand. The blood on his back ribboned with dark. It came out low and steady. He put both hands under him and made it up a hand's span off the floor and then went down. Ray hooked her arms under his and pulled. He was not small. She set her feet and hauled him over the sill one slow inch at a time. Splinters bit her palms. Someone outside grabbed his belt and helped without looking at her. They got him to the boards. The roof over the bar groaned like a barn in wind. A sheet of flame wavered at the doorway. Hale stumbled out through the side door, coughing with Murdoch at his heel. Both had black on their faces and sweat in their eyebrows. Hale tried to fix his smile and could not find it. He turned to the crowd to make them his again. Ray stood over Ash with her pistol in both hands and the barrel rocked steady on Hale's chest. "You set this," she said. "You did this." He spread his hands as if calming a horse. He took a breath that hurt and made a show of it. "Ma'am," he said. "Stop," a voice called from the street edge. "She is right." Eli, Greeley pushed forward, hair flat with sweat, a sheet of paper in his hand. He held it up so the light took it, and the crowd saw the seal, even if they could not read all the words. The paper shook in the heat. "Texas wants Boone Riker," he said. $1,000. Sheriff Murdoch got this and hid it. Hale sat on it. She killed a wanted man. Murdoch reached for his badge like a man who means to steady his hand, and then stay it for a time. Deputy Caleb Finch stepped from the edge of the crowd, young and pale with his eyes clear. He had his hat off. He pinned his jaw and walked to Murdoch and stopped close enough to smell his breath. "Give it to me," Finch said. His voice shook once and then steadied. "You are done." Murdoch stared at him and saw there was no room to bluff. He pulled the star from his shirt like a tooth and handed it over. Finch pinned it to his own chest with hands that got the work right on the first try. He turned to the crowd and raised both palms. "Mayor Hale," he said, "you are under arrest for concealment of a federal notice for conspiracy for what that fire is doing to men in that room." Haley snorted and set his hands on his hips, but his eyes cut around for friends ready to pull for him, and the faces he found had gone a kind of gray that does not promise anything. Eli lifted the old poster and the telegraph flimsy together. The wind tried to take them and failed. Ray's vision narrowed to the size of Ash's chest. Blood wet his shirt and her hands. She pressed both palms to the hole high on his back. Her knees were in glass. She could feel it grind through cloth and into skin. She did not move. Ash's breath whistled in and out thin with a wet rasp. "Ma'am," Finch said. He had moved closer without crowding her, and now he stopped again. He looked down at her, and then at Ash, and then at Hale. "The shooting of Boone Riker is self-defense. As far as this office is concerned, your name is cleared." Ray did not turn her head. Her arms shook and she set her elbows and found more. "I need a wagon," she said. It came out flat and heavy. "Get one," Finch said to no one in particular. 3 men ran. Eli crouched opposite her and put his hand on Ash's shoulder to keep him from trying to roll. "Do not move," he said. "Save the breath." Ash's eyes were open. They were not looking at the fire, or at the men, or at the new badge. They were on Ray. His hand moved without strength to find her wrist. His fingers slipped on blood, and then held a little, just enough for her to feel it. He blinked slow. "Stay," she said. "You hear me?" The roof over the red smoke went with a sound like a tree breaking. Flame burst out and a sheet climbed and rolled until the heat shoved the crowd backward in a ripple. Sparks leaped and fell on hats and coats and were beaten out. Smoke took the sky above the street and turned it the color of a bruise. The green lamp's chain swung without a lamp. The brass bracket hung bright against black char. Men came with a wagon and a team already foam dark at the shoulder. Finch climbed onto the tailboard and reached for the back of the bed to steady it. The driver backed until the wheel bumped the boardwalk. Boards creaked. Someone threw in blankets that might once have been clean. Ray kept her hands on the wound and did not try to see if they were. "Lift on 3, Eli said. He counted, and they moved Ash like glass. His breath hitched and went ragged, and then steadied. Ray climbed in after him and gathered his head into her lap. Blood soaked her dress at the waist and ran to her hip. Dr. Finch said. Ray looked up at him, her face black with soot and streaked where sweat had cut lines. "You bring him to me," she said. "You do not ask. You do not wait. You bring him." Finch's mouth worked, and then he nodded. "Yes," he said. He swung off the tail and ran. Haley stood 10 paces away with 2 men at his elbows who were not quite holding him and not quite letting go. He tried to speak and coughed instead. Smoke came from his mouth as if he were a stove. The crowd's noise rose and fell and carried him nowhere. The wagon lurched. Ray braced and kept her hands where they were. Ash's eyes fluttered and came back. She bent to him with her mouth near his ear. "Breathe with me," she said. "In and out. Do it." He did. She heard it. She counted it without counting. The team pulled. The wheels rolled through broken glass and over a dropped pistol and past a boot someone would not come back for. The heat on her back eased when they cleared the fire. Cool air found the sweat on her neck and made her shake once without meaning to. She set her jaw and held. Eli walked beside the wheel and kept one hand on the wagon board. Finch ran ahead to clear the way and then fell back alongside when he saw he did not have to. The street opened at the edge of town. The dark past the last fence post looked close and clean. Ray kept her eyes on Ash. She pressed where the blood ran and did not lift her hands. The wagon jolted. She steadied his head and spoke to him again and again. Spanish first, then English, anything that sounded like a rope you throw to a man in water. Ash opened his mouth, tried for a word, and let it go. They rolled toward a line cabin where doors still hung and a roof held, and distance grew between them and the glow behind. The town fell away with its fire and faces and the green lamp that had dripped oil until it burned itself out. The night ahead held no light but stars. The sound of wheels and team and quick human breath filled the space that was left. The wagon rattled past the last fence and into the dark. The team blew hard and steady. Eli walked beside the wheel with a hand on the board. Finch kept pace on the other side and shouted at a farmer to wake and bring his lantern. The light swung behind them and fell away. The line cabin leaned under cottonwoods at the edge of a dry pasture. The door hinges still held. The floor was swept dirt. A corn-shuck mattress sagged over a rope frame. They carried Ash inside and set him on the bed with care that made Ray's jaw ache. Finch ran for the doctor. Eli made a fire in a broken-mouth stove and left water to heat whether it boiled or not. The doctor came with his hat crooked and the smell of whiskey walking ahead of him. He looked at Ash's back and shook his head before his hands touched the wound. "Lung is hit," he said. "I can ease him some. He will not see the weak." Ray's pistol was in her hand before the last word left his mouth. She set the barrel on the point of his chest where the buttons pulled. "You ease him by leaving," she said. "Now." The doctor lifted both hands and backed to the door. Finch reached the porch and blocked him there without touching him. "You bring laudanum and clean cloth and the best needle you own," Finch said. "You bring them quick." The doctor nodded and went. Finch held Ray's eye until her hand opened, and the pistol dropped a measure. She put it on the table and picked up a rag. Eli kept the stove fed. The room filled with a heat that smelled like iron and old smoke. They cut the shirt away. The hole high on Ash's back leaked a bright line each time he breathed. Ray washed it with water, gone pink and then clear. She packed it with strips boiled until they steamed. She counted drops of laudanum into a tin spoon. Ash swallowed and went slack. His chest still rose. It was not enough, and it was all they had. Night thinned and thinned again. Days stacked without edges. Ray learned the weight of a minute by breath. When Ash woke wild and tried to roll, Eli put a hand like iron across his shoulder and held until the fight drained. When the fever climbed, Ray wiped him with water and set cool cloths under his neck. When he could not drink, she squeezed drops from a rag and watched his throat work for them. She hunted at dawn with Ash's rifle and his rules. Stay low, cut sign with your eyes before your feet. Set wire where rabbits think they are invisible. Sage brushed her legs and left its smell on her skin. She came back with 2 thin rabbits and a quail foolish enough to sit. She skinned with her knife and boiled meat with a pinch of sage. She fed broth to a man who might not taste it, and to herself when her hands shook. He talked in the fever, words in a mescalero cadence rising and falling like wind around rock. A name in Spanish that lived in the space between a breath. She answered with nothing wise. She said his name soft, so he might know where he was. She said stay in a voice that did not ask. The doctor came once and left a bottle and more cloth and eyes that did not meet Ray's. Finch brought bandage rolls from the jail and a small jar of honey from a woman who did not give her name. Eli left meat and coffee and did not come in unless Ray called. The town sent its penance in pieces. Ray did not look at the door when the hinges creaked. She looked at Ash and at the small pool of light where breath showed itself. On the 22nd morning, the fever broke like glass in water. The skin at Ash's forehead turned cool under Ray's palm. His eyes opened and found her face without sliding away. He tried to smile and made a line of pain instead. You got loud, he said. The words were dry and papery. In that cave. Drink, she said. The cup shook in her hand. He swallowed, coughed, and swallowed again. He slept with a weight that did not scare her. The room went quiet in a way she could stand. Outside, a locust sang itself tired. Dust moved in a beam and showed the shape of air. Recovery came like a careful man walking a fence line. Slow, then truer. Ash sat up with pillows under him and went white from the work. He stood one time a day with Finch's arm under his, and then with Ray's, his hand squeezing her wrist when pain climbed too fast. The bullet stayed in him. The doctor's needle never touched it. It would live there like a stone in the bank of a river, shifted by seasons never gone. He spoke more when sitting was a thing he could do without biting his lip. He watched Ray from the bed while she cleaned the rifle and made the room bear less of what it had seen. You should go, he said. Take what they owed for Riker. Take the road west, and do not stop until you see a thing too big to name. She tied off a stitch in a torn shirt and bit the thread. What road, she said. Any road that is not mine. She put the shirt down and crossed the room. She stood over him, so he had to look up. She set her hand flat on his chest where the bandage rose and fell. The beat under her palm was steady and workmanlike. I am staying, she said. Not because you bled for me, not because I owe. I stay because I choose you. He closed his eyes for a breath and opened them again. The muscle in his jaw worked. He lifted his hand and set his fingers on the rope scar at her throat. He did not press. He did not rub. He touched it like a fact. His voice came low. You were never meant for a halter, he said. They left the cabin when Ash could sit a saddle at a walk. Finch gave them a signed paper and eyes that did not try to hold them. Eli passed Ray a small canvas bag by the reins without comment. It clinked. She did not look inside until the town was a heat shimmer behind them. Silver and gold rested there, the price on a dead man's face. They found land where no one else bothered, where rock ran shallow and wind had cut lines into the earth until it looked like an old man's palm. Locals called it Coyote Draw. The water lay a mile off in a spring that did not quit. The ground lay gray and stubborn. The place felt like a promise given with a squint. They staked it and made it home with what hands could do. They cut sod with a spade until blisters opened and wept. Each block weighed like grief. They carried them and set them in courses on a trench that Ash marked with the toe of his boot. The walls rose thick and cool. The roof went on with poles and brush and a skin of earth. The whole room smelled like damp roots in a riverbed. It held heat in and weather out. Ray slept the first night with dirt under her nails and the braid at her ankle warm against skin. She planted corn in rows straight enough for pride. The first shoots crisped in a hot wind that blew one afternoon and took its time leaving. She cursed and planted again. Rabbits found that second try and ate it down to nothing. She sat on the step with her elbows on her knees and the kind of tired that shakes a person, and she laughed once without mirth. Ash came from the corral with a coil of rawhide and sat beside her until breath calmed in her chest. He picked up a handful of dry soil and let it run through his fingers. My mother said eastern dirt was soft, he said. This is not. You make it listen. She built a fence of stones sharp enough to slice a thumb. She hauled water in buckets that bumped her legs and left bruises she did not name. She learned the weight of a full bucket and the pace a person can keep with two. Her back sang by sundown. She slept like a felled tree and woke to do it again. When the first green held and the cobs threw pale silk, she touched them with reverence out of sight of anyone. Ash worked with the mustangs that lived in bands on the open flats. He did not rope. He waited. He sat on a rock with his hat low and let them get used to the shape of him. Days ran by like antelope. The gray mare with wary eyes began to circle closer. She snorted and stamped and came closer again. Ash did not stand. He held his palm out flat and let his breath turn quiet. The day the mare set her forehead to his hand, Ray felt the hairs lift along her arms. There was no noise in it. The touch lasted a count. He stood then and stepped beside her and placed a hand at her withers. He did not bind. He asked. She let him. He walked with her while the herd grazed and lifted his eyes once to where Ray stood at the fence. She lifted one palm back. It felt like the hand in the cave, true and simple. The sod house gathered them at night. Wind rattled the grass and the roof. The stove ticked. The world narrowed to the bed in the corner and the breathing that filled it. Sometimes Ray woke with the old panic in her throat and the rope scar burning like a brand. Old rooms, old hands. She stared into the dark and counted until the counting broke. Ash found her hand under the blanket. He did not pull her close unless she came on her own. He held her palm in his. His thumb traced the base of each finger, not to soothe, but to say, here. She breathed into his rhythm and out again until the space around them grew wide. The scar on her throat itched, then settled. The braid at her ankle pressed a small circle of warmth at the place where bone rose under skin. Days had shape. Check the traps before the sun hit hard. Clean what you keep. Plant, mend, carry. Ash's limp became part of his stride. Ray's scar puckered and lay quiet most hours. The garden fought her and then gave 3 squash with skin the color of old gold, 6 onions, a handful of beans. She set them on the table like treasure and looked at them longer than anyone would call reasonable. They ate with their heads bent over bowls, a grace neither of them said out loud. When night cleaned the sky, they stepped outside and stood with their shoulders almost touching and watched stars take their places. Coyotes sang far off. The sound stitched the land together. Ray went back inside and untied her boot and checked the knot at her ankle. The braid had taken the color of dust. She touched the knot and then the scar at her throat and felt the distance between them as something she had chosen. She slid under the blanket and turned her face toward the slow sound of Ash's breath. He reached for her hand in the dark and found it without searching. The room settled. The earth walls held cool. The wind went to a hush that sounded like a stream far underground. Evening slid down the stone in a slow pour. Heat let go of the day. The light turned copper and then something darker that held red at the edges. Ray and Ash climbed the ridge at a walk. The mustangs took the slope with easy legs and the kind of breath that does not show. No reins in their hands. Leather lay looped on the horn. The horses listened and stood tall. Coyote draw spread below in long, quiet lines. The sod house had a real porch now, with a bench made from a split cottonwood. Smoke lifted straight from the pipe. A pen of poles held 2 young horses that stamped and tossed, and then decided to save it. The corn stood in a tight square with silk pale as hair. A string of onions dried under the eave. A windmill turned slow and talked in low clicks. Ray's hair had grown, and she wore it in a braid that lay between her shoulder blades. The rope scar at her throat had faded to a thin line. The braid at her ankle sat where it always did. The leather had darkened with sweat and dust. It was smooth with wear. Ash rode with the limp, settled into what he was. He still sat straight. The line of his shoulders could have been drawn with a ruler. The old wound under his ribs pulled sometimes when he breathed deep. It kept its own counsel. His hat brim cut his eyes to shadow. When he smiled, you saw it in the set of his mouth before the eyes caught up. They stopped at the top. The sun lay on the far hills like a coin on a palm. The air up here smelled of warm rock and the thyme that grows in cracks where no one planted it. Wind shook the ocotillo and left it for later. Ray swung a leg and dropped to the ground. Ash stayed mounted a breath longer and then slipped down beside her, careful with the bad leg. The mustangs stood loose, ears turning heads high. Ray put her hand on the mare's neck. The horse blinked slow, then set her weight on 3 and cocked a hoof. Ash reached for the gray gelding's forelock and rubbed the soft place there with 2 fingers. A hawk cut a curve over the draw and threw its shadow like a blade. They did not speak at first. The day did it for them. Far below, the path they had worn to the spring showed pale. The dirt they had turned for beans held straight rows. The corral gate hung true. The windmill kept its count. None of it asked for witness. All of it took one when it was given. Ray looked toward the place where rock folded on itself and made the narrow slot to the cave. The light would be thin in there now. The painted hands would be waiting in their silence, old red over older red, her own print dark and sure beside the rest. She felt the cool of that wall under her palm, the way the stone takes heat and keeps it the way it gives none back. Ash followed her gaze without asking. His face eased a notch. "We will check it when the weather turns," he said. His voice was soft and even. "See if the roof drips." Ray nodded. She did not have to add anything. The words had landed and stayed. They sat on a rock with their hips a handspan apart. The horses stood with heads low and watched the same view. Coyotes started up far off where the mesas fall. One voice, then two, then the whole thin choir. The sound stitched distance together. It did not haunt. It simply named what was there. Ray picked up a pebble and rolled it between thumb and forefinger. It felt smooth and honest. She set it down. Ash reached for her hand without looking and found it. His palm was scarred and warm. His thumb moved once at the base of her fingers, the small mark he made when he wanted her to know what he was thinking without saying it. She turned her head. He was already watching her. In his face she saw the room at Madrone Pocket, when dawn came clean after the dust. The cave wall with the bowl of ground earth, the yard behind Calico Station, where oil smelled sweet and wrong, the street by the red spoke, when the roof went and the world burned white, the line cabin, with the corn shuck mattress, the spring where she had washed his face while he burned, and came back the fence they had built, stone by stone, until the rabbits learned to go around. She saw the bay setting his forehead to Ash's hand. The first ear of corn rolled in both palms, as if it were gold, the three squash lined on the table, like saints. All of it braided up tight, with the quiet now. Ash's voice came low. "Now," he said. It was not a question, and it was not a command. It was the word he used in the cave with the hand on stone. The word he had said once on a ridge like this when the night went down, and the first feeling of free took them. Ray held his look. She felt the braid at her ankle press light against bone, felt her breath go in and out with his, felt the old rope scar rest like a healed seam. She smiled with the side of her mouth and squeezed his hand once. "Yes," she said. They stood again, and let the mustangs pick their own lines back down. The horses drifted side by side with ears touching and then apart. The first stars lifted out of the dark rim and pricked the sky. The draw below took on its night shape. The house looked small and right. The smoke from the pipe thinned to nothing. They reached the yard at the same time silence reached them. Ash dropped the reins, and the gray followed him without thinking about it. Ray set a hand to the doorframe and felt the grain under her palm, the work in it, the steady use. She did not need to say she was home. The room inside glowed in a way no one could see from outside. They moved through the doorway. The earth walls held cool. The stove ticked once as a coal fell to ash. Ray took off her boot and checked the knot at her ankle out of habit. The braid was there, warmed the leather pressed smooth against skin. She let the cuff fall. Ash lifted the latch on the small window to let the night talk to the room. He set his hat on the peg with the habit of a man who has made a place. Outside, the coyotes ran the last of their song. The wind crossed the roof grass and went soft. The stars climbed and kept climbing. The land held what it held. Inside, two people breathed. The sound filled the house plain and full. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.